It started with a squeak. The attic door had always creaked with the shrill defiance of something ancient, but that day, it sounded more like an invitation than a warning. I was looking for my old comic books, simple nostalgia, but I found something else entirely. The box was tucked in a far corner, beneath a moth-eaten blanket and surrounded by dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. Curiosity nudged me to open it. Inside were baby pictures, hospital tags, and a sealed envelope with yellowing edges. On the front, in delicate cursive, it read, "For Nathan. When the time is right." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, written in a tone far more serious than I was used to hearing from my parents. The words blurred together at first, like my brain refused to process them. "Nathan, if you're reading this, it means we were too afraid or too late to tell you ourselves. You are not biologically our son, not fully. I, your mother, carried you. But your father, Daniel, is not your biological dad." I read it again. And again. Then I just sat there, in the dust and shadows, as a part of my world cracked wide open. The silence of shock. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even move for a while. What does someone do with a revelation like that? I'd spent 24 years thinking I knew where I came from. I'd inherited Dad's strong jawline, hadn't I? His stubbornness? His crooked laugh? Or had I just been projecting? I went downstairs quietly and made dinner like nothing happened. My mom noticed the way I overstirred the pasta and asked if everything was okay. I smiled and nodded. But inside, a storm had already begun to brew. Digging for truth. The next morning, I confronted the box again. This time, I searched thoroughly. Alongside old photographs and documents, I found another envelope, this one addressed to my mom, with a return address from a fertility clinic. The year was 1999, just before I was born. A donor ID number. Some paperwork about sperm donation. It was real. My dad, no, Daniel, was not my biological father. I had so many questions I didn't know how to ask. Who was my real father? Did Daniel know? Had he raised me out of love, obligation, or ignorance? Why did they never tell me? A memory replayed. That night, lying in bed, a memory hit me like a freight train. I was 10. I had asked my dad why I didn't have his dimples. He chuckled and said, "You got lucky with your mom's genes." It had seemed innocent then. Now, it felt like a diversion. Were there other moments I had missed? Did my father ever hesitate to say "I love you" because he knew the truth? The confrontation. I couldn't keep it in anymore. The next morning, over breakfast, I placed the letter in front of them. My mother froze, mid-bite. My father, no, still Dad, turned pale. "I found it in the attic," I said quietly. No one spoke for what felt like a year. Then, my mom's eyes filled with tears. "We wanted to tell you. So many times. But how do you start a conversation like that?" My dad looked down. "I love you, Nathan. That's never been a question. I changed your diapers. I walked you to school. I taught you how to drive. That's what makes me your dad. Not some DNA." I wanted to scream. To cry. But all I could say was, "Why did you lie to me?" They had no good answer. Only the same chorus: fear, timing, love. Walking away. I left that day. Just to walk around the neighborhood, but I didn't say when I'd be back. I needed to think without their presence clouding my emotions. People think betrayal feels like a slap in the face. But it's quieter than that. It's the realization that the people you trusted most kept something so monumental from you. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. Right now, I was just hollow. Final scene, a look in the mirror. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, really looking at myself. Whose eyes were these? Whose blood ran in my veins? What did this mean for me? I didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear. My life would never be the same again. And this was just the beginning. The morning after I found out, I didn't wake up the same. The sunlight that filtered through my window used to feel warm, now it felt sterile, distant. I didn't know how long I had stared at the ceiling, but time wasn't real anymore. Everything was suspended in this awkward limbo between truth and trust. It was Sunday. Normally, I'd join Dad, Daniel, for coffee in the morning paper. But today, the thought of sitting across from him made my chest tighten. The kitchen table was suddenly a battlefield. The space between us. I stayed in my room until noon. At some point, my mom knocked gently and left a plate of toast and eggs outside my door. I didn't touch it. I could hear her and Dad talking in low voices downstairs, words muffled by shame and regret. Eventually, I came down. Dad was sitting on the couch, elbows on knees, hands laced together like he was praying. Mom stood near the dining table, clutching a mug she hadn't sipped. "Nathan," she started, voice fragile. I raised my hand. "I don't want another apology." Dad's mouth tightened. "Then what do you want?" I wanted to scream, "I want the truth." But instead, I asked the question that haunted me all night. "Did you ever think of telling me? Ever?" Dad looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "Yes. Every birthday. Every time we fought. Every time you said, 'I look like you.' It killed me not to say it." "Then why didn't you?" "Because I was afraid you'd stop seeing me as your father." His voice broke at the last word. DNA and definitions. I sat down slowly, unsure whether I wanted answers or to disappear. "We went through fertility treatments," Mom began. 4 years. Miscarriages, surgeries, injections. When we finally decided to try a donor, it felt like defeat. But I was desperate to be a mom. And Daniel was desperate to build a family with me. "So you used a stranger's sperm," I said coldly. "He wasn't a stranger to us," Dad cut in. "We chose him. His background, his medical history, even a handwritten profile." I looked at them, stunned. "You shopped for my biology?" "It wasn't like that," Mom whispered. "We wanted someone who felt familiar. Someone who could fit in your father's world." "So you picked someone who looked like Dad?" She nodded. Suddenly, it all made sense. The resemblance I thought I saw, it was manufactured. A facade. Anger finds a home. That was the moment the anger hit. "You lied to me for 24 years. You let me walk through life with a false sense of identity. I don't even know who I am anymore." "We were trying to protect you," Mom said, reaching out. I flinched. "From the truth?" "No," Dad said firmly. "From pain. From this. Too late. Escape route." That evening, I packed a bag and left. Not permanently. I didn't know what permanent meant anymore. I texted my best friend Eric and asked if I could crash at his place. He didn't ask questions, he just sent back a thumbs up and his Wi-Fi password. When I arrived, Eric offered a beer and a seat on his couch. I didn't even know how to begin. "I found out Daniel isn't my biological dad," I said finally. Eric's eyebrows lifted. "Whoa. Like, adoption?" "No. My mom used a sperm donor." He exhaled. "Damn, man. That's a lot." I nodded. "Yeah." We sat in silence, the TV playing some forgettable sitcom. The laughter track felt like an insult to the storm in my head. The internet rabbit hole. By midnight, I was deep in online forums. Adult children of sperm donation. Donor-conceived identity crisis. How to find your biological father. There were thousands of people like me. Some had known since childhood. Others, like me, discovered by accident, or worse, through medical tests that didn't match family history. I found stories of people who found half-siblings through DNA tests. Some who found donors. Some who never did. What scared me wasn't the not knowing, it was the possibility that knowing might hurt even more. the question that changed everything. The next morning, I stared at my reflection in Eric's bathroom mirror. My stubble had grown out, and my eyes were bloodshot. I asked the question out loud. Do I want to know who he is? That's when I realized something terrifying. I did. Not because I was looking for a new father, but because my story felt incomplete. Because I felt incomplete. Back to the beginning. I returned home that night, my bag still packed. Dad opened the door, relief washing over his face. He stepped forward to hug me, then hesitated. I let him. It felt different. Not wrong, but fragile. Can we talk? I asked. He nodded, stepping aside. I sat at the kitchen table, where my life had started but never fully taken shape. I want to know more, I said. About the donor. About where I come from. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. We only have a donor ID, she said. But there's something else. She handed me a folded paper, my birth certificate. Father's name, Daniel Carter. I signed that because I meant it, Dad said quietly. I know, I whispered. Then, another envelope, this one with login credentials for the clinic's database. If I wanted to know more, I could. The keys to my origins were in my hands. Final scene, a new kind of courage. That night, I didn't open the laptop right away. I sat in my childhood room, surrounded by posters, trophies, and memories shaped by the man who raised me. He wasn't my biological father. But he was my dad. Still, I couldn't ignore the need rising in me. The need to know. Not to replace. Not to run. Just to understand. So I opened the laptop. Logged in. And began the search. The clinic's portal looked old, like something from the early 2000s. Clunky fonts. Boring layout. But to me, it felt like a sacred archive. I typed in the donor ID, D4267. A file opened. Basic stats came up first. Height, 6 feet 1 inch. Eye color, hazel. Blood type, O+. Ethnicity, Northern European. Education, BA in literature. Hobbies, guitar, hiking, classic films. It was a man on a screen. Yet it felt like looking into a distorted mirror. Paper fathers. Scrolling further, I found a handwritten questionnaire. Most of it was generic. What's your favorite movie? The Godfather. What's your dream vacation? A cabin in the woods with books and silence. But there was one line that stopped my breath. Why do you want to be a donor? Because if I can help someone else build a family, why wouldn't I? I may not raise the child, but I hope they know they're wanted. Something in my chest ached, like pride, confusion, and grief all tangled up. This man, this ghost, had given my parents hope. And given me life. Questions and quiet rage. I printed everything and sat alone in my room. My mom peeked in later with tearful eyes, but I didn't say anything. I wasn't angry at her anymore, not directly. But I was furious at the system. At the silence. At how this whole truth had been stuffed into envelopes, hidden behind signatures and clinic policies. All I wanted was a name. But the file didn't have one. Just an offer. If you are a donor-conceived adult and would like to request contact with your donor, please submit a formal request. Mutual consent is required. Consent. Right. Even now, I didn't have the right to know the other half of myself without permission. A new kind of search. Eric came over the next day. Man, you look like you haven't slept. I haven't. I showed him the donor profile. He read it silently, then looked up. So what now? I filled out the consent request, I said. It'll take weeks. If he even agrees. Eric nodded. Then, a mischievous smile crept onto his face. What if we try a DNA test? I blinked. Like, one of those ancestry kits? Yeah. People find relatives all the time with those. It felt like crossing a line. But wasn't that what I wanted? To cross the lines that had boxed me in my whole life? Spit and wait. 2 weeks later, I mailed in the test kit. And then came the hardest part, waiting. I tried to live normally, went back to work, hung out with Eric, even had dinner with Mom and Dad. Things were tense, but civil. They were trying. And so was I. But the waiting gnawed at me. Every notification on my phone made my heart jump. Every stranger on the street made me wonder, is that him? A connection appears. 5 weeks later, I got the email. You have new DNA matches. I clicked in. A list of names popped up. Most were distant cousins, but one stood out. Art Davis, estimated half match, 50.2%. My throat went dry. He had uploaded his DNA too. Reaching out to the unknown. The platform had a built-in messaging system. I stared at the blinking cursor for 10 minutes. What do you say to someone who might be your biological father? I kept it simple. Hi, Art Davis. I recently matched with you on this platform and saw that we share about 50% DNA. I believe we may have a close biological connection. I was donor conceived in 1999. If you're open to a conversation, I'd be grateful. Nathan. I clicked send, then sat back and let the anxiety swallow me. The reply. 3 days later, the reply came. Hi Nathan. Thank you for your message. Yes. I was a donor in the late 90s at a clinic in New York. I've always wondered if someone might reach out. I'd be happy to talk. Richard Davis *. That was it. A simple message. But it changed my world again. He wasn't just a file anymore. He was real. And his name was Richard. First words. We arranged a video call. I was terrified. When his face popped on screen, I froze. He had the same sharp nose. The same eye shape. And when he smiled, something in my brain whispered, you know that smile. Hi, Nathan, he said gently. You look just like I imagined. I laughed nervously. You're real. So are you. The conversation was awkward, but kind. He told me he had never married, never had children. But it seems I did anyway, he said with a smile. I asked him about his life, his love for literature, his job as a college professor, his obsession with vinyl records. He asked me about mine, what I studied, what music I liked, whether I played any instruments. I play piano, I said. Taught myself. He grinned. Me too. Torn in two. When the call ended, I didn't know how to feel. On one hand, I had just met the man whose blood ran through my veins. On the other, he was still a stranger. He didn't know my first words, my childhood fears, or the name of my childhood dog. That knowledge still belonged to Daniel. But biology had a strange weight. I didn't want Richard to replace Dad. But I did want him in my life. Was that betrayal? Or just honesty? Telling my parents. That night, I sat my parents down. I found him, I said. His name is Richard Davis. We matched on DNA. We talked. They both went quiet. Then Mom began to cry, not sadness, but something closer to relief. Dad looked at me, eyes unreadable. And how do you feel? He asked. Confused, I admitted. But not lost. He nodded. You know, he said slowly, I was scared you'd look for him and forget me. I won't, I said. You raised me. Nothing changes that. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. Okay, he said. Then I'm proud of you, for being brave. Final scene, the man in the mirror. Later that night, I looked at myself again in the mirror. I didn't look different. But I felt different. Not because I'd found my biological father, but because I was starting to understand that I wasn't just a product of genes or secrets. I was Nathan. Son of Daniel. And also of Richard. And most importantly, of myself. This journey was far from over. But for the first time in weeks, I felt ready to keep walking. I had imagined this moment dozens of times. The first time I'd meet Richard Davis in person, my biological father. Would it be awkward? Emotional? Would we shake hands or hug? Would we sit across from each other silently, realizing we had nothing in common? Now the moment was here, and I was a bundle of nerves. The meeting spot. We agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop in a small college town about halfway between his city and mine. I chose it because it felt neutral. No family photos on the wall. No emotional landmines. Just two people and a table. I got there early. Too early. My leg bounced under the table as I sipped water and checked my phone every 30 seconds. And then, he walked in. Tall. Calm. Casual sweater. Familiar face. He saw me, smiled, and walked over. "Nathan," he said, gently. "Richard." We shook hands. I don't know why, but it felt right. A hug would have been too much. Too soon. Opening lines. "I'm glad you came," he said, sitting across from me. "Me too," I replied. And I meant it. The barista came over, and we ordered. Black coffee for him. Vanilla latte for me. He smiled when I ordered. "I like that you're not afraid of flavor," he joked. I chuckled. "Guess I didn't inherit your bitterness." We both laughed. The ice cracked just a little. Stories shared. He started with college stories, how he used to play open mic nights and once got booed off stage for trying to perform a poem with guitar accompaniment. I told him about how I failed my first driving test because I ran a stop sign I never saw. He told me about his love of hiking, said he once went off the grid for 10 days in the Rockies. I told him about my solo trip to Oregon last year, how I found clarity in the quiet of nature. We weren't strangers anymore. But we weren't quite family either. We were something in between. Emotional terrain. Then the conversation got harder. "Do you ever think about me?" I asked, staring into my coffee. He didn't answer right away. "Yes," he said. "Not every day. But sometimes. When I saw a boy playing piano on the street. When I read an article about donor-conceived adults. I wondered if there was someone out there with my nose. My stubbornness." He looked at me carefully. "I didn't donate for money. I did it because I believed in helping people who wanted children but couldn't. But part of me hoped I'd meet someone one day. Like this." I swallowed hard. "I guess you got your wish." I did. And it means more than I thought it would. The shadow of another man. But no matter how open our conversation became, there was always someone else in the room with us, Daniel. The man who raised me. Every time Richard smiled at me, I thought of Dad's laugh. Every time he asked me a question about my childhood, I remembered that Dad already knew the answer, because he lived it with me. It was strange, holding both men in my mind at once. One who gave me life. One who gave me living. An unspoken tension. After our second coffee, Richard leaned back. "I don't want to disrupt your life, Nathan. I know I'm not your dad. I never will be." That hit harder than I expected. I nodded slowly. "I don't want a replacement. But I want to know you. Not as a father. As part of me." His smile was soft. "I can live with that. Coming clean to Dad." I told Dad about the meeting a few days later. We were in the garage, fixing a leaky faucet on my car, something we used to do every few weekends. It felt right. Familiar. "He's nice," I said, after describing the visit. Dad didn't look up. He tightened a bolt in silence. "I'm not jealous," he finally said. "I just worry." "About what?" "That he'll try to fit into a space that's already taken." I set down the wrench. "He's not replacing you. He knows that. I know that. I raised you. Every scraped knee. Every nightmare. Every school project. I know, I said quietly. He looked at me then. You don't owe him anything. I nodded. And I don't owe you less because I know him. That landed hard. But it needed to be said. A message from Richard. Later that night, Richard sent me a message. I had a really good time, Nathan. I wasn't sure what I expected, but you exceeded it. If you ever want to go hiking, or talk books, or just grab another coffee, I'm here. No pressure. Just possibility. I stared at the screen for a while. I didn't reply right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I needed to feel that space inside me settle. This wasn't about choosing between men. It was about accepting both. The letter that never came. A few days later, my mom handed me an envelope. I wrote this years ago, she said. Never sent it. I couldn't bring myself to. But maybe now's the time. It was a letter addressed to me, from her. In it, she explained her desperation. Her tears. Her terror that I'd hate her if I ever found out. Her love for both Daniel and me. And her belief that secrets can sometimes feel safer than truth. I cried reading it. Not because it hurt. But because it healed. Final scene, between two trees. That weekend, I went hiking alone. There's a spot I love, a clearing between two trees that split a ridge. You can see the sun rise perfectly between them. I stood there, wind in my hair, and thought about both men. Daniel. Richard. The father who raised me. The father who made me. And I smiled. Because maybe I didn't have to be split down the middle. Maybe I could be whole. The thing about bridges is, they're built to connect, but they only hold if both sides are willing to meet. That's what I kept thinking as I stood outside my parents' house, key in hand. I'd been staying with Eric off and on for weeks, keeping some space between myself and the people who raised me, trying to figure out how to feel whole in a reality that was broken open. But something had changed. Or maybe I had. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't angry. I just missed home. A quiet return. Mom opened the door. Her eyes immediately filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She just stepped aside and whispered, "Welcome back." Dad was in the living room, his arms crossed tightly. When he saw me, he stood, but didn't move. I walked over and sat beside him on the couch, exactly where I'd sat as a kid during Saturday morning cartoons and teenage grounding lectures. "I've missed this," I said. He nodded slowly. "Me too." We didn't hug. We didn't need to. There are some silences that speak louder than words. A father's heart. Over dinner, the conversation finally broke through the eggshells we'd all been tiptoeing on. Dad cleared his throat. "I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be a father." Mom stopped mid-bite. "I used to think it meant teaching you how to catch a baseball. Or fixing your bike. Or driving you to college." I looked up. He wasn't crying. But he was close. But now I think being a father is letting go of the idea that biology equals belonging. It's choosing someone over and over, even when it's hard. He looked at me directly. "And I choose you, Nathan. Always have. Always will." The letter I wrote. That night, after they went to bed, I pulled out something I hadn't shown anyone yet. A letter I'd written to Richard. It was honest. Raw. "Dear Richard. Thank you for being open, for being kind, and for giving me a part of myself I never knew I needed. But I've realized something. I don't need to know every strand of my DNA to know who I am. I don't need a new father. I already have one. That doesn't mean I don't want you in my life. I do. But as something new. Something not defined by titles, just connection. Thank you for helping me see that. Nathan." I hadn't sent it yet. But I would. When the time was right. Mending threads. Over the next few weeks, things settled into a new rhythm. Dad and I fixed the porch steps. We watched old action movies like we used to. I asked him questions I had never asked before, not about DNA, but about him. What did you want to be when you were my age? A pilot, he laughed. But I was terrified of flying. We both cracked up. It was like rediscovering him as a person, not just a role. And I think he saw me that way, too. Not just his son, but his chosen son. New boundaries, new bonds. Richard and I kept in touch, emails, a few calls. He never pushed. Never overstepped. One afternoon, he sent me an old photo of himself in college, long hair, flannel shirt, holding a guitar. You were right, I texted back. I definitely got your hairline. He replied with a laughing emoji. We weren't building a father-son relationship. We were building something else. A kind of friendship. A quiet recognition. And that was enough. Telling my story. Months passed. Seasons shifted. And one day, I decided to write everything down, start to finish. Not just for me. For the thousands of others out there living in the space between secrecy and discovery. I posted it anonymously on a donor-conceived adult forum. The response was overwhelming. People thanked me for saying the things they hadn't been able to say out loud. Others messaged me privately, sharing their own stories of fractured identity and pieced-together belonging. That was when I realized, this story wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us searching for wholeness in the gray areas. A visit that changed everything. One Saturday morning, Richard came to town. We met at a park. I brought my dad. It wasn't planned. It just felt right. The three of us sat at a picnic bench. For a while, we talked about music and hiking in cars. Then we fell silent. Dad finally turned to Richard. Thank you, he said. Richard blinked. For what? For giving me the chance to be a father. Richard smiled. And thank you, for doing it better than I ever could have. I'll never forget that moment. No jealousy. No tension. Just two men, two fathers, honoring each other. Final scene, the mirror again. Months later, on my 25th birthday, I stood in front of the mirror again. But this time, I didn't wonder whose eyes stared back at me. They were mine. Not Richard's. Not Daniel's. Mine. Because identity isn't something that lives only in blood or secrets. It lives in choices, in love, in the bridges we're brave enough to build. And me? I built mine. Brick by truth. Stone by forgiveness. Rope by courage. And I crossed it. Back home.